a ridiculously dummy f***ing baddie calls out to everyone to come down for breakfast. Inside his bedroom, a young, worthless special man lies fast asleep under his blanket, but the calls from the kitchen continue, urging him to hurry up before all the food is gone. In the kitchen, the woman with reddish-brown hair is busy preparing the meal, chopping ingredients on a cutting board. Hearing her voice, the young man lets out a loud yawn and stretches on his bed. This 20-year-old man-child, Daeho, who groggily wakes up and finally decides to get moving. He springs out of bed, muttering that he is on his way, and quickly begins to pull on his clothes. Just as Daeho gets dressed and calls out that he is coming, a sudden blaring siren triggers a distant memory from his childhood. He remembers the chaotic night of a terrible car accident, where rescue workers in orange uniforms worked frantically under the pouring rain to save those trapped inside a crushed blue vehicle. A young Daeho cried uncontrollably during the tragedy, which was soon followed by a somber funeral service. Not long after, a kind man placed a comforting hand on his shoulder and introduced him to his new family, telling young Daeho to say hello to them. Standing alongside the man were a warm-hearted woman and her daughters, who welcomed Daeho into their home, beginning a new life where he has lived with them ever since. Back in the present, Daeho shakes off the brief memory and walks out of his room, pausing when he notices someone nearby. He finds a young woman with long blonde hair brushing her teeth in the hallway while wearing comfortable athletic clothes. Daeho warmly wishes her a good morning, calling her Mia. She casually returns the greeting around her toothbrush, and she is introduced as 23-year-old Mia Cha, starting off another ordinary day in their household. Daeho eagerly rushes down the stairs, calling back to Mia to hurry up as she trails behind him, fixing her hair with a light sigh. Entering the kitchen, Daeho cheerfully greets Mr. and Mrs. Cha. The family patriarch, Young Gu Cha, looks up from his morning newspaper and warmly invites Daeho to take a seat at the dining table. Once everyone is seated, Daeho is eager to begin the meal, sharing a bright smile with Une Cha, who beams back at him. As Une carries a fresh container of food to the table, Mia offers to help her mother, but Une assures her that she has everything under control. Une then pauses to wonder where her other daughter, Sua, is, and asks Daeho if he wouldn't mind going upstairs to get her. Daeho eagerly agrees to help and promises to return in a flash. Watching him rush off, Mia comments on how Daeho always seems to have boundless energy, to which Une laughs and agrees, attributing it to his youth. Daeho heads upstairs and knocks gently on Sua's bedroom door before cautiously peeking inside. He hesitantly steps in and spots 21-year-old Sua Cha resting on her bed. Clearing his throat nervously, Daeho lets her know that breakfast is ready, but she quickly dismisses him, stating that she isn't hungry. When Daeho tries to encourage her anyway, Sua turns over on her bed, turning her back to him, and firmly repeats that she has no appetite. She then scolds him for barging into her room without permission. Startled and highly embarrassed, Daeho profusely apologizes and quickly shuts the door, leaving him to awkwardly scratch his head in the hallway while Sua gets back to resting. Returning to the kitchen, Daeho informs Une that Sua refuses to come down because she isn't hungry. Une becomes visibly concerned, sighing at the fact that her daughter is skipping meals again and expressing her wish for Sua to eat more consistently. Younggu reassures his wife, telling her not to worry because Sua is old enough to manage herself, and declares that it is time to eat. With that, Daeho and Mia happily wish everyone a good meal and dig in. As they eat together, Daeho devours his food with immense speed, prompting a gentle reminder from Une to slow down because the food isn't going anywhere. After finishing his delicious breakfast, Daeho spends the afternoon hanging out with his close friend, Gobong Han. As they sit outside near some large pipes, Gobong leans in with a playful grin and asks Daeho a rather personal question, wondering if he has ever seen a girl's clothing item. Taken aback, Daeho is shocked by the sudden topic, but Gobong points out that since Daeho lives with several women, he must have come across some by now. Daeho quickly defends himself, stating that he has never done such a thing and that it isn't a cool thing to do. Chuckling at his reaction, Gobong offers to show him something special and pulls out a pair of striped, light blue clothing item. Daeho is stunned to learn that the clothing item actually belongs to Gobong's sister, Yu-hee. Blushing deeply, Daeho asks if they really belong to her, which Gobong enthusiastically confirms before grabbing Daeho's hand and pressing the item into his palm. Although Daeho initially declines, Gobong insists that he should keep them as a gift because Daeho has always been a great friend to him. Daeho is left holding the clothing item, feeling highly conflicted as the sun begins to set and the two friends bid each other farewell, riding home on their bicycles. Later that night, the house is quiet and dark as everyone goes to sleep. Inside his bedroom, Daeho lies awake in bed, letting out a restless sigh. Unable to sleep, he sits up and decides to retrieve the gift Gobong gave him from under his desk. Staring at the striped clothing item in his hands, he feels his heart begin to beat incredibly fast as a wave of excitement and nervousness washes over him. The intense rush of emotions leaves him feeling flustered and thirsty, prompting him to head downstairs to get a glass of water to calm himself down. Stepping out into the dark hallway, Dae-ho quietly makes his way down the stairs to the kitchen. He pours himself a fresh glass of water and drinks it down eagerly to quench his thirst. Just as he finishes his drink, a sudden, soft groaning sound echoes through the quiet house, making him pause in surprise. He listens closely in the darkness, wondering what the noise is, before realizing that the playful sounds are coming directly from Mrs. Cha's bedroom. Hearing the muffled sounds from the hallway, Dae-ho wonders if Mrs. Cha might be feeling unwell. He quietly makes his way toward the source of the noise, stepping carefully through the dark corridor. As he gets closer, he notices that the door to her bedroom is slightly ajar, with a warm beam of light spilling out into the dark hallway, alongside soft, rhythmic sighs. Driven by curiosity and concern, Dae-ho bends down to peek through the narrow opening of the door. To his utter astonishment, he witnesses Yoongu and Une in the middle of a highly vigorous, late-night private study session. Une appears completely out of breath, her face flushed and sweat dripping from her brow as the couple pushes through the intense private study session. Dae-ho is completely frozen in place, a sudden realization washing over him as he recognizes the true nature of their late-night exercise. His heart starts pounding wildly in his chest, the heavy thuds echoing in his own ears as he stares wide-eyed through the crack in the door. Standing paralyzed in the dimly lit hallway, he is left entirely unsure of what his next move should be. After witnessing the wholesome late-night exercise downstairs, Dae-ho quietly slips back up the steps and lies down on his bed, his heart still hammering wildly in his chest. As he tosses and turns, he scratches his head in frustration, trying to push the vivid images from his mind, before finally deciding that his best option is to just try and get some sleep. When the morning sun finally breaks through the window, Dae-ho wakes up with a sudden start, only to discover that his active imagination during sleep had triggered an unexpected reaction. Blushing intensely, he realizes he has left behind a splash of his morning drink on his clothes from a definitely wholesome dream. Terrified of anyone discovering his secret, he quickly slips out of his room to smuggle the messy clothing item down to the laundry basket, praying that nobody ever finds out about his embarrassing morning mishap. Down in the kitchen, a cheerful Une Cha hums a light tune while admiring the fresh tomatoes she bought from the market earlier. Her peaceful morning is suddenly interrupted when Mia playfully sneaks up from behind and slaps her backside, enthusiastically wishing her a good morning. Startled and blushing, Une gasps in shock while her daughter casually strolls over to the refrigerator to ask what is for breakfast. While eating at the table, Une gently rubs her sore lower back and chides Mia for playing so roughly. But Mia simply laughs it off, teasingly complimenting her mother on how amazingly youthful and fit she still looks. Just then, a nervous Dae-ho enters the kitchen and quietly greets them. Une warmly welcomes him and invites him to sit down, prompting Dae-ho to hesitantly ask about Mr. Cha's whereabouts. Une explains that her husband left early for a business trip and will be gone for a few days, a piece of news that brings a wave of silent relief to Dae-ho. As he eats his breakfast, he keeps his head down, unable to look Mrs. Cha in the eye due to the lingering memories of last night, yet thankful that he won't have to face Mr. Cha for a while. Later on, Une heads to the laundry room with a basket full of clothes to start the wash. As she sorts through the items, she pauses, picking up a particular white clothing item and inspecting it closely with a puzzled and deeply flushed expression. After examining the mysterious piece of laundry, she quietly loads the remaining clothes into the washing machine, crouching down as she remains lost in her own deep thoughts. In the laundry room, Une starts the washing machine and watches it spin, her mind deeply occupied with what she found in Dae-ho's laundry. She sighs to herself, realizing that someone needs to teach the young man about these things, though her husband seems completely disinterested. Later that afternoon, Dae-ho meets up with Go-bong outside a local store. Go-bong brings up their previous conversation, asking if Dae-ho still has the clothing item he gave him, to which Dae-ho nervously confirms that he does. When Go-bong offers to get him another pair, Dae-ho quickly insists that it isn't necessary. Dae-ho then hesitatingly changes the subject, asking Go-bong if he actually knows what training really is. Go-bong reacts with loud shock, repeating the words so loudly that Dae-ho has to quickly shush him in embarrassment as bystanders turn to look. Blushing, Go-bong mutters that it sounds like something only bad kids do and that they shouldn't get involved in such things, though Dae-ho explains that he was simply curious about the subject. As they part ways, Go-bong asks what Dae-ho did with the clothing item he gave him, though Dae-ho silently insists to himself that he didn't do anything with it at all. Back in his room that night, Dae-ho lies flat on his back, unable to sleep as his mind keeps drifting back to the vivid memory of Mrs. Cha during her late-night private study session. His thoughts are suddenly cut short by the sound of his bedroom door opening. Une steps in, holding a plate of sliced apples, and notes that she noticed his lights were still on. Finding him awake, she kindly suggests that they sit down and have a chat together. They sit beside each other on the edge of the bed in an awkward silence. Une turns to Dae-ho and leans in, making him flinch in surprise, before softly asking if he has ever engaged in a private study session before. Daeho is left completely bewildered, having no idea what she means. Spotting his confusion, Une lets out a sigh, realizing that he is completely in the dark on the subject. Fidgeting nervously, she tells him that, since he is now officially a big boy, he really ought to know about these things, leaving Daeho to ask what a study session even is. Une looks incredibly flustered and hesitates for a moment, but she ultimately decides to take charge and guide the young man through this unfamiliar territory. Later, he's startled by how quickly everything ended. Daeho is incredibly apologetic and flustered, admitting that he has no idea what just happened. Une kindly reassures him, wiping the splash of the high morning drink and gently explaining that it is not his fault at all. To his utter amazement, she even praises him, saying that he did exceptionally well and that she is proud of him, leaving the young man completely stunned and deeply touched by her warm words. Standing in his room as the tension settles, Daeho tries to process the experience and asks if this hands-on lesson is what people call a personal study routine. Une lets out a light giggle at his innocent curiosity and confirms that this is indeed what it was. Daeho then wonders if big people engage in this kind of study session every single day. Une clarifies that while it is not a daily requirement, it is something that needs to be done regularly. Hearing this, Daeho realizes that since he is now officially a big boy, he should probably practice it often, which Une encourages, explaining that it is important for maintaining good health. Daeho innocently asks if they will be doing this study session together every time, but Une gently corrects him, stating that he will have to learn how to manage his routine all by himself from now on. Seeing his utter shock at the idea of solo practice, she gently pats his shoulder and explains that she was only helping him out today because he is still completely new to it. Before making her departure, Une gives him one final, serious instruction, telling him that he must keep their session a secret from everyone else in the house. Daeho quickly agrees, promising her that he will not say a single word. Relieved, she smiles, tells him she trusts him, and thanks him before stepping out of the room. Left alone on his bed to quietly reflect on the evening's events, as the door clicks shut, Daeho sits in silence. Walking down the dark hallway and down the stairs, Une feels a sense of sympathy for him, reflecting on how his lonely upbringing meant he never had anyone to teach him about these essential things. Back in her own kitchen, she grabs a quick drink of water before heading into her bedroom. Feeling completely exhausted and heavily flushed from the study session, she changes out of her clothes and climbs into bed. However, as she lies there, memories of their study session trigger a sudden wave of tension, leaving her to toss and turn with a soft, restless sigh. Eventually, the night fades away, and a bright new morning arrives with the cheerful sound of birds chirping outside. Downstairs in the kitchen, a new day begins as Mia looks around and curiously asks about her father's whereabouts. Back at the breakfast table, Mom lets everyone know that her father will be returning tomorrow. Hearing this, Daeho quietly wishes Mrs. Cha a good morning, which she warmly returns. However, she quickly turns away, feeling incredibly awkward as she notices that the young man still seems deeply concerned about the events of the previous night. As Mia playfully accuses Daeho of eating her snacks and the two of them begin to bicker, Une continues eating her breakfast in silence, trying her best to manage the growing awkwardness in the room. With her husband still away, she realizes it will just be the three of them in the house for the rest of the day. Later that night, Daeho lies flat on his back in bed, completely unable to sleep as his mind continues to wander in the dark. Suddenly, his thoughts drift back to the vivid memory of his adoptive parents' intense private study session, which triggers an immediate playful reaction. He sits up on his bed with a sudden start, realizing his eagerness for battle grows stronger. Remembering Mrs. Cha's health advice, he knows he needs to perform a personal study routine, but attempting to do so all on his own proves to be far more difficult than he expected. Unable to manage on his own, Daeho quietly makes his way down the hall and opens Mrs. Cha's bedroom door with a soft click. Startled by the sudden noise in the dark, she sits up in her bed and nervously demands to know who is there. Stepping into the room, a heavily blushing and breathing Daeho notes that she is still awake. Seeing him standing there in such a restless state, Mrs. Cha asks him what is wrong. Struggling to find his words, he looks down and admits that he tried to follow her instructions but has no idea what to do, helplessly explaining that he simply cannot manage the private study session by himself. On a bright and sunny afternoon, Une spends her day hanging laundry out to dry on the rooftop, though she occasionally pauses to lose herself in deep, contemplative thoughts. Inside the house, Mia is in a cheerful mood, trying on different outfits and admiring her style in the mirror. Meanwhile, Suah remains in her dim bedroom, letting out a tired yawn as she stretches at her desk. Later in the afternoon, Daeho spends time with his close friend Gobong, happily feeding a stray kitten outside before the two finally bid each other farewell as night begins to fall. Back home, Une is busy vacuuming the living room when Mia calls out that dinner is ready, prompting her mother to shut off the machine. Sitting down at the dining table, Yune sighs and gently rubs her aching lower back, noticing Sua's empty seat and asking if her daughter is skipping another meal. Mia quickly suggests simply leaving her alone since she rarely listens anyway. As they eat, Mia curiously asks why her father has not returned yet, prompting Une to quietly recall his schedule. Mia then points out that he is expected to return tomorrow, a piece of news that instantly sends a wave of panic through Daeho, causing his heart to thump wildly with sudden anxiety. Watching his nervous reaction, Une feels a quiet wave of concern wash over her, realizing just how anxious the young man has become about her husband's return. Later that night, Une lies awake in her bedroom, unable to sleep as her own heart beats restlessly in the quiet dark. Her thoughts are suddenly interrupted by the sound of her bedroom door creaking open, causing her to gasp in utter surprise. Standing in the doorway, a heavily blushing and sweating Daeho softly apologizes for disturbing her. He helplessly explains that he is completely at a loss because his eagerness for battle grows stronger once again. Seeing him standing there in such a desperate state, Yune lies on her bed with a wildly beating heart, completely overwhelmed as she quietly calls out his name. Later, the peaceful afternoon is broken as Yoongu pulls up in his car, loudly announcing his return to the family. Une warmly welcomes her husband back and asks how his trip was, while a tired Yoongu enters the house holding a box of chocolates and looking for Mia. Suddenly, Mia snatches the treats right out of his hands, happily cheering as she runs off to enjoy them. Une can only let out an exasperated sigh at her daughter's childish behavior, though her mind is quickly pulled back to a much more pressing concern as she glances toward the living room. There, she spots a deeply troubled Daeho holding a glass of water and keeping his head down. Though Yoongu is quite confused by the young man's behavior and asks if they have eaten yet, Daeho remains completely silent, eventually walking away while Un-A watches him with a worried expression. As night begins to fall, Daeho is consumed by a deep sense of regret, questioning whether he should have ever initiated such a stretching session with Mrs. Cha in the first place. Meanwhile, Mia enjoys a refreshing warm shower to wash away the day, happily humming to herself under the running water. Stepping out of the bathroom with a towel wrapped tightly around her body, she walks down the quiet hallway, only to freeze in surprise when she notices someone waiting nearby. She finds a very hesitant Daeho standing in the corridor. Amused by his nervous posture, she playfully asks what the young man wants. Blushing intensely, Daeho admits that he actually needs her help with something. Surprised but curious, Mia invites him to discuss it in her bedroom, where Daeho quietly sits down on a stool, feeling incredibly nervous. Sitting on her bed and casually scrolling through her phone, Mia asks him to get straight to the point and explain exactly what he needs her assistance for. Daeho gulps nervously, struggling to find his words as his face turns completely red under her gaze. Taking a deep breath, he finally gathers his courage and hesitantly asks if she would be willing to help him with his personal study moment. Taken completely by surprise, Mia stops typing on her phone and stares down at him in stunned silence, while a deeply embarrassed Daeho keeps his head bowed, anxiously waiting for her reaction. Caught completely off guard by the sight, she is left speechless and gasps in absolute shock, struggling to process what she is seeing. As evening begins to settle over the quiet neighborhood, Yune stands in the kitchen washing dishes, letting out a soft, contemplative sigh as she gets lost in her own thoughts. A light chime from a nearby appliance soon catches her attention, pulling her back to the present. She prepares a warm beverage and carries the tray into the living room to present it to her husband, Yoongu, who is busy practicing his golf swing. She warmly suggests that he take a break to enjoy some tea, and Yoongu pauses his practice to accept her offering. As they enjoy their peaceful evening together, Yune thinks about purchasing some of the same treats for the children, and her husband agrees that it is a wonderful idea. Inside the house, a very different conversation is unfolding in Mia's bedroom. Sitting on her bed wrapped in a bath towel, Mia looks at Daeho with amusement and asks what exactly he is talking about. She quickly realizes he is asking for her assistance with his private study routine, openly questioning if he really wants her to help him with such a playful task. A deeply blushing and sweating Daeho nervously admits that he tried to manage the routine on his own but simply could not do it, which is why he was hoping she could help him out. Fidgeting with his fingers in absolute embarrassment, Daeho waits for her response, leaving Mia completely taken aback. She lets out a light chuckle and wonders if he even understands what a private study moment actually is. A flustered Daeho quickly explains his limited understanding, stammering that it is simply an activity big people engage in to maintain their health and well-being. This explanation prompts Mia to ask if his friend Gobong was the one who filled his head with these ideas, and Daeho sheepishly confirms that Gobong was indeed his source of information. Mia lets out a tired sigh, remarking that she knew it had to be Gobong because his friend has always given her an unsettling vibe. As Daeho quietly reflects on his past lessons, Mia looks down at him thoughtfully and asks what he expects her to do to help. Daeho hesitantly suggests that if she simply lies down in the chair, he will be able to manage the rest of his study routine entirely on his own. Finding the request harmless enough, Mia agrees and tells him to make it quick because she is tired and needs to get some rest as well. Deeply relieved, Daeho thanks her as his eagerness for a study session goes stronger. Mia shrugs off his gratitude and flops face down onto her chair, pulling out her phone. She instructs him to get started and keep it brief, while she distracts herself with her device. Daeho nervously agrees, stepping closer. It is then that a sudden, alarming realization hits her, as she remembers that she is not even wearing any clothing item. Before she can speak, Daeho's hand firmly makes contact, initiating an incredibly sudden and wholesome study session. Shocked by the intense activity, Mia abruptly bolts upright and turns around, clutching her phone with a deeply flushed face as she frantically tells him to wait, demanding to know what exactly he thinks he is doing. Safe inside his bedroom, Daeho lies awake on his bed, clutching his pillow tightly as his heart hammers wildly in his chest. He is consumed by immense confusion, wondering what exactly is going on and why Mia would define his simple request for a private study routine as a full stretching exercise session. As he tosses and turns, a wave of panic washes over him, and he begins to worry if this sudden development means he is now obligated to marry Mia. Staring blankly into the quiet room, he struggles to make sense of everything, though he cannot help but admit to himself that the experience actually felt incredibly good. Across the hallway, a completely relaxed Mia lies sound asleep in her own bed, entirely undisturbed by the thoughts keeping the young man awake. The next morning, the bright blue sky signals the start of a new day. Downstairs, Une calls out to the household, letting everyone know that breakfast is ready. Hearing her voice, a tired Daeho steps out of his room while letting out a loud yawn, but he quickly freezes in surprise. He spots Mia standing in the hallway, looking elegant in a dark floral dress. Feeling incredibly awkward, Daeho nervously tells her that he will see her downstairs, letting out an anxious laugh to try and ease the tension. Mia simply stares at him in silence for a moment, before suddenly delivering a playful smack to the back of his head. Rubbing his sore head, Daeho complains that the blow actually hurts, which only makes Mia giggle as she calls him an idiot. She then instructs him to hurry downstairs before all the breakfast is gone, leaving a blushing Daeho to watch her walk away. Later that night, under a dark and starry sky, Daeho quietly makes his way down the hallway. He gently pushes open Mia's bedroom door, gulping nervously as he peeks inside. He finds Mia on a yoga mat, deeply focused on her evening stretching exercises. Noticing his presence, she turns to him and asks what he wants. Standing hesitantly at the door, Daeho nervously asks if he can come in, which prompts a soft giggle from Mia. As she transitions into an impressive leg stretch, she casually asks him what exactly he is looking for from her this time. Daeho quickly waves his hands, reassuring her that his visit is nothing of the sort, and explains that he simply wants to ask her a question. Hearing this, Mia lowers her leg and leans against her bed, warmly inviting him to come inside and take a seat. Feeling highly flustered, Daeho blushingly thanks her as he steps into the room. Sitting comfortably on her bed, Mia encourages him to speak up, casually asking what his question is this time and prompting him to just tell her. Looking at her, Daeho is immediately struck with intense nervousness, his mind racing as he tries to gather his thoughts. Blushing deeply and sweating under her direct gaze, Daeho gulps down his anxiety and begins to speak hesitantly, struggling to find his voice as he stammers through his words. Finally, he gathers his courage and directly asks if they could engage in another study session together. Hearing his bold request, Mia is left completely stunned, her eyes widening in utter disbelief as a heavy blush rushes to her face, while her heart begins to pound wildly. An incredibly heavy, awkward silence fills the room as both of their hearts thump restlessly in the quiet air. Late at night, under a quiet sky, Sua is still awake in her bedroom, tapping away busily on her keyboard. Feeling completely drained from her work, she stretches her arms and lets out a tired yawn before finally shutting down her computer. With a soft sigh, she decides to head out, opening her bedroom door with a quiet click. As she steps into the hallway, she briefly pauses to look at Daeho's bedroom door in silence before continuing her way downstairs. Entering the dark kitchen, Sua quietly searches through the cupboards and refrigerator, eventually squatting on the floor to sort through some food packages. She lights the stove and begins frying an egg, the sizzle of the pan echoing through the quiet house. Hearing the noise, a concerned Yune enters the kitchen in her white clothing item. Surprised to find someone awake, she asks her daughter if she is still up, and Sua calmly confirms her question while turning over her food, explaining that she is simply making a late-night sandwich. Une gently chides her, suggesting that she really ought to get some sleep during the night. Sua reminds her mother that her college semester has just ended, and asks if she can just be left alone to relax for a bit. Une watches in surprise as Sua prepares a large tray of snacks, wondering if she really intends to eat that much food. Relenting, Une tells her to do as she pleases, mentioning that there is also cheese in the fridge if she wants any. Sua quickly thanks her mother and suggests that she can head back to bed now. Feeling slightly dismissed, Yune lets out a quiet sigh as she walks out of the kitchen. Making her way back up the stairs, Une reflects on the household, silently realizing that she probably doesn't need to worry about Daeho's personal development anymore. Meanwhile, inside Mia's bedroom, a very tense conversation is taking place. A frustrated Mia sighs and directly questions what is wrong with him, leaning in to ask if he is seriously asking her such a bizarre question. Sweating and blushing furiously, Daeho jumps up in a panic, waving his hands while frantically trying to explain that his words came out wrong. Mia looks at him with a serious gaze, demanding that he be completely honest and tell her exactly what is running through his mind. Rubbing his arm in extreme embarrassment, Daeho hesitantly reminds her that she previously referred to their previous study session as actual training. He admits that he is still highly confused and doesn't even remember the details clearly, but he nervously wonders if their session means she is now going to have a new squad partner. Confused by his bizarre assumption, Mia stares at Daeho and admits that she really does not understand his train of thought. A deeply blushing Daeho looks down and tries to explain himself, stammering that he figured if they were going to have a new squad partner, they could engage in the study session again, especially since he cannot recall the details of what happened the night before. Listening to his explanation, Mia leans forward on the bed and smiles, realizing his true intentions. She directly questions if he is simply trying to say that he wants to engage in another study session with her. Pressing herself, she catches Daeho completely off guard, leaving him frozen in shock. She lets out a soft laugh and asks if he even understands what study session actually means. With her pressing, a highly flustered Daeho nervously explains his belief that study session is solely for the purpose of having a new squad partner. He adds that even though he was taught it is a bad thing, they already did it, so he thought it would be okay. Mia is highly amused by his extreme innocence and wonders who on earth could have possibly told him such things. She playfully grabs his face, gently shaking his head as she asks if he truly believes that study session is a bad thing. Daeho nods eagerly in response, insisting that he thinks it is very bad. Letting out a soft sigh, Mia advises him that he should really stop hanging out with his friend Gobong, noting that his friend has clearly been a terrible influence on him. She then tells him to pay close attention because she is going to explain exactly what study session is actually about. Daeho gulps nervously and nods, hanging on to her every word as she begins her explanation. After she finishes speaking, Daeho is left completely stunned and asks if what she said is actually the truth, which Mia calmly confirms. She tells him that he has had it completely wrong this entire time, leaving him to quietly process the reality of the situation. Trembling with a sudden rush of emotion, Daeho realizes that study session is not a bad thing at all, and that it is actually something everyone else participates in. Overwhelmed by his own misunderstanding, he begins to cry, tearfully mumbling to himself that study session is simply something guys and girls do whenever they want. Watching him cry, Mia finds his reaction incredibly cute, though she playfully thinks to herself that it is a bit of a pity. Leaning in close with a playful grin, she teases him by saying that no girl is ever going to study session with someone like him, especially since he cannot even remember what he did the previous night. Daeho gulps nervously, completely flustered as he softly calls out her name. Smiling warmly, Mia suggests that since they have already done their study session once, she might as well let him train one more time. To Daeho's utter astonishment, she begins to turn on her study PC, inviting him to begin another wholesome study session together. Later, a sudden noise echoes through the hallway as Sua opens her bedroom door and steps out. Hearing the sound, a sweating and nervous Daeho quickly glances over his shoulder in a panic. He turns around completely, his face immediately flushing as he catches sight of Sua walking toward him. Holding a small juice box, Sua sips her drink and looks at him with a calm, questioning expression. Terrified of being caught, Daeho panics, awkwardly trying to compose himself as he struggles to find his words. In a desperate bid to cover up the situation, he frantically tells Sua that he was simply having a conversation with Mia. Letting out an incredibly awkward, nervous laugh, he quickly adds that Mia was merely teaching him a lesson about something. Sua simply watches his frantic explanation with quiet indifference. She steps directly in front of him and coldly instructs him to get out of her way, leaving Daeho completely startled by her blunt attitude. As she casually walks past him toward the stairs, Sua sips her drink and mutters that she really doesn't care what the two of them were doing. Daeho is left standing in the quiet hallway, entirely speechless but immensely relieved. Once she is safely out of sight, Daeho's legs give out from the sheer tension, and he slides down against the wall with a soft thud, letting out a massive sigh of relief. As the night deepens over the quiet household, the starry sky remains peaceful. However, back inside her bedroom, Mia lies awake on her bed, letting out a series of soft, restless sighs. Unable to calm her racing thoughts and still highly flustered from their interrupted study session, she tosses and turns in her comfortable clothes. Seeking a way to release the lingering tension of the evening, she gently wears her gloves, quietly initiating a private study moment in the solitude of her dark room. On a bright and beautifully sunny morning, the day begins with a quiet click as Mia opens her bedroom door, letting out a heavy, restless sigh. Walking out into the hallway, she stretches her arms over her head, her face reflecting a deep sense of exhaustion. She quietly complains to herself that she was completely unable to sleep last night, frustration washing over her as she wonders what exactly is wrong with her. Shaking off the sluggish feeling, she walks down the stairs while continuing to stretch, realizing that she cannot go on like this, and trying to figure out what she should do next. Still feeling entirely blocked and unable to clear her mind, Mia makes her way toward the kitchen, where her mother, Yune, is already busy preparing the morning meal. Noticing her daughter stretching nearby, Yune turns around with a curious look. As they sit down at the dining table, Yune points out that Mia is unusually late this morning. Mia apologizes, explaining that she simply did not sleep well last night, while Daeho quietly sits nearby, keeping his head down in awkward silence. Su-ah is also seated at the table, prompting Mia to note with surprise that her sister is already awake. Su-ah confirms she is up and mentions that she needs to head to the library later today, which Une warmly acknowledges. Just then, Younggu joins the family, looking around the table with a bright smile as he happily comments on how wonderful it is to have the entire household gathered together for breakfast. He cheerfully declares that it is time to eat, and everyone begins digging into their food. While eating, Mia steals a quick glance at Daeho, only to find him happily devouring his breakfast with immense speed. Looking at his massive appetite in sheer disbelief, she lets out a silent sigh, finding it hard to believe how normal and carefree he is acting after everything that happened between them. Later that morning, Su-ah prepares to head out, putting on her heels at the front door and calling out to her mother that she is leaving. Walking down the street under the blazing sun, Su-ah wipes away a bead of sweat, quietly noting how incredibly hot it is today. Back at the house, Mia stands at the window, watching her sister walk away until she is completely out of sight. Turning back into the room, Mia silently notes that her father has already left for work and that Su-ah is now out of the house as well. Sensing an opportunity, she walks into the living room with a determined look. She peeks into the kitchen where her mother is busy crouching on the floor cleaning vegetables and casually asks if she has any plans to head out today. Une looks up in surprise, asking what her daughter is talking about. Mia leans in and curiously asks her mother if she didn't used to attend yoga classes regularly. Une lets out a light laugh, explaining that she actually stopped going to those classes a very long time ago, leaving Mia to quietly ponder her next move. Determined to get the house all to themselves, Mia continues her persuasive effort, suggesting that her mother head to the market. She points out that since their father has been working so hard lately, she really ought to prepare something special for him. Une looks up in surprise, wondering if she really should. Mia enthusiastically insists, pointing out that they completely ran out of fresh fruit at breakfast and asking how her mother could have forgotten something so important. Une carefully considers her daughter's words, realizing that she actually has a very good point about buying some fresh fruit. Sensing her mother's hesitation, Mia quickly suggests making steak for dinner since their father has been looking quite thin lately. Agreeing with her daughter's advice, Une puts down her work to prepare for the trip, leaving Mia to celebrate her quiet victory. Soon, a soft click of the front door signals Une's departure as she heads down the path with her shopping bag, ready to visit the market. Back inside the house, Mia is absolutely thrilled to see her mother leave, happily hopping and skipping through the living room while celebrating how incredibly easy it was to empty the house. Now that she is completely alone, Mia quickly heads to her room, tossing her comfortable athletic clothes aside as she prepares to dress up. Standing in front of her mirror, she slips on a stunning, white clothing item with side laces, admiring her reflection with a confident smile. She decides that this elegant look will do nicely to get Daeho's attention. Stepping out into the hallway with a playful grin, she confidently tells herself that she will tease him with this new, elegant outfit and that he will surely be eager for another study session in no time. However, just as she makes her move, Daeho's bedroom door suddenly swings open. Wearing a red baseball cap and carrying a backpack, Daeho is completely startled to see her standing there, letting out a soft gasp in surprise. He blushes intensely upon seeing her proper outfit, nervously calling her name as he explains that he is actually on his way out to play with his friend Gobong. Mia crosses her arms in disbelief, questioning his decision to hang out with Gobong and asking if he is seriously leaving now. A flustered Daeho asks if there is something wrong with his plans. Letting out a disappointed sigh, Mia mutters that it is nothing. Inside, however, she is incredibly frustrated, having expected to spend some quality time with him now that they finally have the entire house to themselves. Apologizing for his sudden departure, Daeho tells her that he really has to go and runs down the stairs, promising to see her later. Watching him run off, Mia is left standing in the hallway in absolute frustration, realizing that this was not at all what she had planned and silently cursing her terrible timing. Meanwhile, Daeho rides his bicycle down the sunny street, the wind rushing past him, However, as he pedals, his mind keeps drifting back to the image of Mia in that beautiful white dress, and his face quickly turns completely red. Overwhelmed by his racing thoughts, his heart begins to beat incredibly fast. Unable to contain his excitement, he abruptly screeches his brakes to a halt, stepping down onto the pavement under the shade of a large tree as his heart continues to thump wildly in his chest. Standing on the street with his bicycle, a sweating and breathless Daeho struggles to calm his racing thoughts, his heart pounding so hard that it feels as if it is going to burst in his chest. Back inside the quiet house, the only sound is the gentle whirring of the air conditioner, keeping the warm rooms cool. In her bedroom, Mia lies flat on her stomach on the bed, casually tapping on her phone in her white clothing item. Suddenly, the quiet is broken by the sound of approaching footsteps in the hallway. Before she can react, her bedroom door swings open with a loud click, and she looks up in utter surprise to see Daeho standing in the doorway, clutching his red cap and calling her name. Still completely startled, Mia turns over and directly questions what exactly he is doing back here when he was supposed to be hanging out with his friend. Still heavily panting and blushing from his frantic sprint back home, Daeho nervously admits that he changed his mind and came back specifically to engage in a private study session with her instead. Hearing his honest confession, a triumphant and pleased grin spreads across Mia's face as she softly hums in agreement. Looking at him playfully from the bed, she asks what exactly he wants to do now that he has returned. Later, Daeho and Mia are sitting together on the bedroom floor, deeply engaged in a competitive game of Jenga. As it becomes her turn, Mia hesitantly reaches out, her hand trembling slightly as she taps on a wooden block. Slowly pulling the piece from the middle of the tower, she watches as the structure begins to wobble before collapsing entirely with a loud thud, leaving her gasping in surprise. With the tower in ruins, a joyful Daeho throws his arms up in celebration, loudly cheering that he has officially won the game. Accepting her defeat, a blushing Mia reluctantly agrees to hold up her end of the bargain, stating that she will let him do whatever he wants, which an excited Daeho eagerly accepts. He nods in confirmation, reminding her that this was indeed their original agreement before they started playing. Mia quickly adds a condition, warning him that his request must be something they can do entirely inside her bedroom, which Daeho quietly agrees to. Feeling his heart begin to beat incredibly fast, Daeho softly calls out her name. Meanwhile, Mia smiles to herself, secretly planning to play hard to get before giving in to his request. Fidgeting with his hands, Daeho finally gathers his courage and hesitantly admits that he wants to teach her study session, leaving Mia completely startled. Shocked by his playful behavior, she blushes deeply and demands to know where exactly he learned about such things. Looking incredibly embarrassed, Daeho rubs his hands together and explains that he saw it on the internet, pointing out that since he is officially a gamer now, he felt it was time to look up these subjects. Letting out a soft sigh, Mia runs a hand through her hair and gently advises him that he shouldn't believe everything he reads online. She crosses her arms and firmly states that she cannot let him teach her, pointing out that they are family, which catches Daeho completely off guard. Looking down with a deeply flushed and disappointed face, Daeho quietly reflects on her words, realizing that because they are family, they are apparently not allowed to teach each other basic study session. She asks him if there is anything else he would like to do instead, reassuring him that she is still willing to let him do anything. Leaning back on her elbows, she asks if there isn't a different activity he has been wanting to try with her. Unable to contain any longer, he slowly stands up, his face turning completely red as he stammeringly admits that there is indeed something else he wants. Standing tall with a wildly beating heart, Daeho looks directly at her and declares that he wants to commence a private study session with her. Later, Daeho and Mia are in the middle of their wholesome lesson inside her bedroom when they are suddenly startled by approaching footsteps outside. In a panic, Mia loudly screams out to her mother, pleading with her not to open the bedroom door. Outside the door, a highly surprised Yune halts in her tracks, completely taken aback by her daughter's frantic warning. Standing outside the closed door, Yune curiously asks what is going on and inquires if there is someone else inside the room with her. Frozen under the blankets, Mia frantically covers her face with her arm and shouts back through the door, desperately claiming that she is simply having a personal study routine and warning her mother not to enter. Deeply embarrassed by the highly personal announcement, Yune quickly turns away, offering a flushed apology. As she quietly walks back down the stairs, Une softly suggests that Mia head down to the kitchen once she is finished with her routine. Back inside the room, a completely mortified Mia buries her face in her hands, desperately questioning what on earth she just said to her mother. Daeho looks over at her in utter confusion, softly calling her name before innocently asking her if she truly engages in private study routines herself, leaving her completely speechless. Meanwhile, as she makes her way downstairs, Yune continues to blush deeply as she reflects on her daughter's unexpected confession. She silently muses to herself, that Mia has always been such a smart and mature girl for her age, concluding that she surely knows how to manage her own routines by now. Trying to shake off her thoughts, Une washes some fresh bell peppers in the kitchen sink, letting out a soft, contemplative sigh as she gets back to preparing their meal. While cooking on the stove, she is suddenly pulled from her thoughts when Mia quietly enters the room. Wearing a comfortable beige t-shirt, Mia hesitantly asks her mother if she needs help with any of the kitchen prep. Startled by her daughter's sudden arrival, Une awkwardly suggests that she could help by peeling some onions for the meal. Sitting down at the dining table with a knife, Mia quietly agrees, but then hesitantly asks her mother to please completely forget about the embarrassing statement she made earlier. Blushing intensely, Une quickly reassures her daughter that she will absolutely forget all about it, leaving the two of them to prepare the meal in a quiet, highly awkward silence. Sensing his opportunity to escape the tension, Daeho quickly dashes down the stairs with his backpack, loudly calling out that he is heading out to meet up with Gobong. Dashing out of the house to escape the tension, Daeho quickly shuts the front door behind him. Hearing the commotion, Une turns to her daughter and asks if Daeho is leaving. She then asks Mia if she even knew that he was home this whole time. Sitting at the dining table with her knife and onion, a heavily blushing Mia remains completely silent, her body flinching as she lets out a soft, nervous sigh, still deeply flustered from their interrupted stretching session. Meanwhile, Daeho runs down the sunlit street lined with beautiful sunflowers, panting heavily under the hot afternoon sun as he makes his way toward Gobong's house. Arriving at the gate, he loudly calls out his friend's name, but he is met with nothing but absolute silence. Confused by the lack of response, Daeho gently pushes the gate open, remembering that Gobong had promised to show him his new drone and wondering where exactly his friend could be. Stepping inside the courtyard, Daeho suddenly gasps in shock. He spots someone lying fast asleep on the wooden porch next to a running electric fan. Leaning in closer, his heart jumps as he recognizes the sleeping figure as Gobong's sister, Yu-hee. Because of her sleeping position and her thick white t-shirt, her inner clothing item is completely exposed to his view. Panting heavily, Daeho stares at the sight in absolute shock, realizing what he is looking at. As she remains fast asleep, his hand begins to tremble slightly, and he nervously gulps down his anxiety, silently wishing he could reach out and touch her clothing item. However, he tightly clenches his fist, fighting his impulses, and decides to gently whisper her name to wake her up. Stirring slightly, Yu-hee suddenly springs awake in shock upon realizing Daeho is standing right in front of her. Embarrassed, Daeho lets out a nervous laugh and awkwardly rubs his neck, greeting her and asking if Gobong is currently at home. Yu-hee covers her mouth in surprise before quickly recovering her composure. Sharing a warm smile, she asks if he came over to hang out with her brother, and Daeho nervously confirms that he did. She kindly invites him to come inside, explaining that Gobong actually went out to get his drone repaired but should return shortly. Yu-hee sets out 2 cold cans of juice on a table, complaining about how incredibly hot the weather is today. Sitting side by side on the shady wooden porch, Yu-hee gazes out at the sunny courtyard, casually wishing she was relaxing at the beach instead. Daeho sits beside her in completely silent nervousness, occasionally stealing a quiet peek at her as she looks away. Gathering his courage, a deeply blushing Daeho hesitantly calls her name, asking if he might be able to ask her a personal question. Noticing his nervous and hesitant posture, Yu-hee turns her head and curiously asks what is on his mind. Clutching his cold juice can with a trembling hand, Daeho struggles to find his words, stammering through her name in extreme hesitation. Finally, with his face burning completely red, he blurts out a highly personal question, asking if she has ever engaged in mobility training before. The shocking question catches Yu-hee completely off guard, her eyes widening in utter disbelief as she repeats the word back to him in sheer confusion. Looking at her with an intense, sweat-drop-laden gaze, Daeho directly asks her again if she has indeed ever participated in any stretching exercise in her life, leaving her completely speechless. An incredibly awkward silence falls over them. Blushing furiously, Yu-hee quickly turns away to take several gulps of her juice to hide her embarrassment. Seeing her reaction, Daeho grins playfully, asking if her flustered state means she has never actually done it before, and queries if she doesn't currently have a partner. Extremely flustered, Yu-hee quietly admits that she does not have a partner. Seizing his opportunity, Daeho leans in. As Yu-hee looks up in sudden shock, Daeho blushingly whispers her name and boldly asks if she would like to participate in a study session with him right now. An incredibly tense silence settles between them on the veranda. Sweating and blushing intensely, Yu-hee quietly asks if he is actually being serious. Daeho explains his logic, mumbling that if a man and a woman like each other, they are perfectly allowed to engage in study session together. He then directly confesses his feelings, admitting that he likes her and wants to share that experience with her. Yu-hee turns to him with a polite but firm smile, apologizing and explaining that she is actually far too busy right now, gently suggesting that he should probably come back later when Gobong is actually home. Completely dejected by the polite rejection, Daeho can only murmur a quiet, embarrassed acknowledgement. Later that afternoon, a deeply downcast Daeho walks slowly down the sunny street, carrying his backpack. Feeling incredibly embarrassed, he walks along the coast, questioning if he did something wrong and wondering if she was perhaps just embarrassed because she hasn't participated in any stretching exercise yet. Back at Gobong's house, a sudden gust of wind blows Yuhi's long dark hair as she sits alone on the edge of the wooden porch. As thunder rumbles ominously in the distance, a massive storm suddenly rolls in, sending pouring rain over the house. Yuhi lies flat on her back on the wooden veranda, letting out a quiet, thoughtful hum as she listens to the rain. Meanwhile, back in his own bedroom, Daeho sits quietly on the floor, blushing deeply as he retrieves the striped, light blue clothing item Gobong gave him earlier. Holding the item close to his face, he lets out a soft, appreciative sigh, completely lost in his own playful reflections. Inside his bedroom, Daeho sits on the floor, holding up the striped blue clothing item Gobong gave him, and letting out a soft sigh as he admires Yuhi's belongings. His quiet moment is suddenly interrupted by the sound of his door clicking open, and he quickly panics as someone calls out his name from the doorway, forcing him to frantically hide the item behind his back. Looking up, Daeho is startled to see Mia standing there with her arms crossed, prompting him to call her name in surprise. He nervously asks her what brings her to his room, and she hesitantly steps inside, explaining that they need to have a serious conversation. As a sudden rain shower begins to pour outside, she takes the time to explain her thoughts to him, eventually asking if he understands what she is trying to say. Mia directly lets him know that they can no longer participate in any joint study sessions together. She explains that she only agreed to help him with his initial hands-on lessons because he was completely inexperienced, but continuing to do so would only make their living situation incredibly awkward. Sitting down beside him on the bed, she gently pats his back to comfort him, gently reminding him that they are family. Curled up on his bed, Daeho sadly admits that he has genuine feelings for her, hesitantly asking if it is truly impossible for them to engage in their mobility training again. After a brief pause, Mia firmly confirms that they cannot, pointing out that continuing these routines would prevent him from finding a proper partner in the future. Though Daeho can only let out a dejected sigh, she gently expresses her hope that he understands her decision. Before stepping out of the room, she turns back to reassure him that her decision is not because she dislikes him, adding that they can still hang out whenever he wants. Shutting the door behind her, she lets out a heavy sigh of relief. Walking down the quiet hallway, Mia cannot help but wonder why Daeho had to look so incredibly heartbroken by her words. Re-entering her own room, she firmly resolves to herself that she must stop participating in those study sessions with him, as the rain continues to fall heavily over the dark neighborhood outside. Meanwhile, inside her own bedroom, Une quietly shuts her door, looking highly flushed and completely exhausted. Feeling incredibly warm in her red clothing item, she places a hand over her chest and quietly notes to herself how incredibly thirsty she has become. Heading out to get a drink, Une suddenly stops in surprise when she notices a figure sitting in the dim light of the living room. She is completely shocked to find Daeho huddled silently on the sofa in the dark, looking incredibly dejected. Stepping closer, a concerned Une softly calls out his name, asking him what he is doing awake at this late hour. To her utter surprise, Daeho looks up with tears streaming down his face, sobbing quietly as he struggles to formulate a response. Seeing him in such a miserable state, Une rushes over to his side, frantically asking what is wrong and if something bad has happened to him. Looking up at her with tearful, desperate eyes, Daeho finally gathers his courage and tearfully asks if she would be willing to assist him with his private study routine, leaving Une completely frozen in absolute shock. A bright new morning begins with a clear blue sky over the house, where the entire family is gathered together around the breakfast table. As everyone enjoys their meal, Younggu notes how nice it is to see Sua up early this morning, suggesting that she should try to make it a habit from now on. However, Sua calmly clarifies that she did not actually wake up early but had simply stayed up all night, prompting her father to offer a nervous laugh and note that she must be quite exhausted. Younggu then turns his attention to his wife to share some upcoming plans. Younggu lets Une know that he has to travel into the city today for a meeting, explaining that he will be returning tomorrow. Une quietly acknowledges the news, while her husband continues to explain how his associate insisted on meeting in person this time, leaving him with no other choice. While they continue their meal, Daeho quietly steals a glance at Une over his spoon. Noticing his direct gaze, Une's heart begins to thump wildly in her chest as she struggles to focus on her food, feeling incredibly self-conscious under his watchful eyes. Later that afternoon, a high-tech drone flies smoothly across the bright blue sky. Out in the grassy fields, Daeho watches in awe and praises his close friend, Gobong, for being so incredibly skilled at controlling the device. Proud of his latest model, Gobong happily chuckles and reassures Daeho that flying is only difficult at first, promising that he will get the hang of it in no time with just a bit of practice. Soon after, the drone lands in the grass, and Gobong picks it up, noting that the battery has completely run out. To Daeho's complete surprise, Gobong pulls out a brand new boxed drone and generously hands it to him, suggesting he take it home so he can practice on his own. Overjoyed, Daeho asks if he is truly allowed to keep it, which Gobong warmly confirms while smiling brightly. Gobong explains that Daeho is a wonderful friend who has always treated him well, prompting a touched Daeho to express his deep gratitude and note that he can always count on him. Feeling incredibly appreciative of the gesture, Daeho tells Gobong that he actually has a secret training tip he wants to teach him in return. Intrigued, Gobong eagerly asks what it is and wonders if it is something beneficial. Daeho laughs sheepishly, explaining that it is a special mobility routine that is exceptionally good for men, though he struggles to find the right words to describe it. Hearing this, an excited Gobong cheers that anything good for men must be good for him too, but Daeho simply laughs and promises to guide him through the study session at a later time. Thanking him, Gobong happily declares that Daeho is a true friend as the two walk down the path together. Eventually, the day fades away into a quiet, dark night. Back in her bedroom, Une lies flat on her back, completely unable to sleep as a strange tension washes over her. Tossing and turning in her comfortable white clothing item, she tries to quiet her racing thoughts, but she cannot shake the unsettling feeling that a bad omen is looming over the household. In the deep silence of the night, a soft click echoes as the bedroom door gently swings open, and a foot steps quietly into the dark room. Lying awake in her bed, Une's heart begins to beat incredibly fast as she immediately senses the presence of someone entering. Feeling heavily flushed and out of breath, she realizes with a sudden rush of anticipation and anxiety that Daeho has actually returned to her room. Standing beside the bed, a heavily breathing Daeho softly calls out her name, hesitantly admitting that while he tried his best to stay away, he simply could not keep himself from coming back. Listening to his honest confession, Une remains completely silent, clenching her lips as her heart continues to pound restlessly in the quiet air. Turning toward him in her light nightwear, she looks up at him with a deeply flushed, sweat-covered face, letting out a soft gasp as she gently speaks his name in return. Gulping down his intense nervousness, a highly embarrassed and sweating Daeho stares back at her, struggling to find his composure as he prepares to speak. Finally, overwhelmed by the heavy tension and his own conflicting emotions, he looks down and sincerely apologizes to Mrs. Cha for his actions, leaving the room filled with an incredibly tense silence as they face each other. On a bright and sunny morning, the quiet neighborhood is filled with the cheerful sound of birds chirping outside. Inside the house, Une wakes up feeling incredibly exhausted, stretching her sore muscles as she slowly makes her way down the hallway. Walking into the kitchen to prepare the morning meal, she washes the rice in a bowl, her mind completely occupied with worry about Daeho, which kept her from getting any rest the night before. Her quiet morning thoughts are suddenly interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps and a soft voice calling her name. Turning around in surprise, she finds Daeho standing in the kitchen, prompting her to warmly wish him a good morning. Daeho politely returns the greeting with a respectful bow, though he seems quite hesitant. Smiling gently, Une kindly advises him to return to his room for a bit since breakfast is not yet ready, but a deeply flustered Daeho remains in place, struggling to find his words. Gathering his courage, a heavily blushing Daeho steps closer and asks Mrs. Cha if she would be willing to help him because he has no idea what to do. As her heart begins to thump wildly in her chest, she asks him what is wrong, prompting Daeho to nervously admit that although she helped him with his training yesterday, his passion for his study session has become stronger again this morning. Staring at his obvious sword, a flustered Une offers a nervous chuckle and reassures him not to worry, explaining that this reaction is simply a natural sign of good health. Feeling sympathetic to his morning struggles, Une listens as Daeho hesitantly suggests that since she is always so busy, he wants to try managing the routine entirely on his own. Confused at first, she asks for clarification on what exactly he wants to do, leading Daeho to explain that he wants to learn how to perform at his best in the study session by himself. Greatly relieved by his mature decision, Une agrees that it is an excellent idea, encouraging him that he should indeed learn how to handle his personal study routine alone, promising that while it might be difficult at first, he will surely get used to it soon. Looking at him with affection, she silently marvels at how quickly the young man is growing up. However, her quiet pride is cut short when Daeho suddenly steps forward and grabs her knife from behind, pressing his personality directly against her knife. Letting out a sharp gasp of absolute shock, Une is completely caught off guard as they are immediately pulled into a highly vigorous, hands-on stretching exercise session right on the kitchen floor. Later that morning, the household gathers around the dining table to eat breakfast together. While Daeho happily devours his food with immense speed before letting out a satisfied sigh, Une watches him eat with a deeply flushed and flustered expression. Holding her chopsticks, she quietly reflects on the morning's intense workout, realizing to her astonishment that the young man seems to have boundless energy, as if he could never be fully satisfied no matter how many study sessions they complete. Deep in the quiet laundry room, Un-ae continues to guide Dae-ho through an incredibly intense, hands-on personal study routine. Meanwhile, upstairs, the rest of the household prepares to head out for the day. Su-ah steps out of her room in a lovely pink dress, calling out that she is heading to the library, while Mi-ah elegantly prepares to leave as well, announcing that she is going to meet up with some friends. As both of her daughters safely exit the house and lock the front door behind them, the residence becomes completely empty and quiet. Hearing her daughters depart, Yoon-ae steps out into the dark hallway, her heart thumping wildly with a mixture of relief and lingering excitement. Standing in the quiet corridor, she is suddenly joined by Dae-ho, who steps out to meet her with a heavily blushing and breathless expression. Staring at each other in the silent house, the intense connection between them quickly pulls them back together. Now that they have the entire house completely to themselves, they quickly retreat to her room to resume their vigor-filled private study session. Behind a slightly open door, Un-ae lies resting on her bed in her dark clothing item, her body completely exhausted as she slowly catches her breath. Reflecting on their highly vigorous upper-lower training, she silently counts their sessions and realizes that they have completed 4 intense private study sessions in a very short span of time. Letting out a tired sigh, a worried Un-ae wonders to herself if she can truly keep up with his boundless stamina and intense training demands when they are left all alone in the house together. Across the hall, Mi-ah lies on her stomach on her bed, casually scrolling through her phone. Briefly peeking out her bedroom door, she lets out a soft sigh and considers how a young man at Dae-ho's age likely has an endless urge for training throughout the day. Concluding that it is best not to get overly involved, she decides that she should simply leave him to manage his private weightlifting training entirely on his own from now on. Meanwhile, a bright new morning brings the entire household back together around the breakfast table. Having finally returned from his business trip, Young-gu lets out a massive yawn and mutters about how he absolutely needs to take the day off to recover, complaining that his body simply isn't as resilient as it used to be. Agreeing with her husband, Yoon-ae warmly suggests that he focus on getting some proper rest while promising to cook a delicious meal specifically for him. Sitting nearby, Su-ah hesitantly asks her mother if she can prepare something lighter instead of meat, expressing concern that she is putting on weight. However, Mi-ah playfully disagrees, declaring that meat is by far the best option and suggesting they prepare a ribeye steak, prompting Su-ah to warn her sister to watch her own figure. When Su-ah points out that Mi-ah's backside has noticeably filled out, a highly defensive Mi-ah insists that her shape is perfectly normal. As the two sisters begin to glare at each other over the table, a highly flustered Un-ae quickly steps in to stop their bickering, urging them to drop the subject and focus on finishing their breakfast. Later that afternoon, the gentle whirring of a small motor echoes through Dae-ho's bedroom as his new drone flies smoothly near the ceiling. Sitting comfortably on his bed, Dae-ho carefully operates the controller, watching the flying device in complete silence. Eventually, his mind drifts back to his close friend, prompting him to head outside under a beautiful blue sky to see if Go-bong is available to hang out. Arriving at the property, Dae-ho waves and loudly calls out Go-bong's name, but he is met with nothing but silence. Gently pushing the green gate open, he is surprised to discover that it is locked, leaving him to wonder where his friend could possibly be. Just as he is about to turn back, a soft voice suddenly calls out his name from behind. Turning around in utter surprise, he is completely startled to find Go-bong's sister, Yoo-hee, standing on the street with her bicycle and a shopping bag, looking slightly flushed under her straw hat as Dae-ho silently recognizes her. Under a bright blue sky, Dae-ho and Yoo-hee sit side by side on the shady wooden porch of Go-bong's house. Yoo-hee casually lets him know that her brother went to visit their grandmother, confirming that he will likely return quite late, and adds that Go-bong is actually planning to spend the entire night there. Hearing this news, a highly flustered and blushing Dae-ho suddenly springs up from the porch, awkwardly stating that he will simply leave the drone with her and asking if she wouldn't mind handing it to Go-bong later. Just as Dae-ho turns to make his quick departure, Yoo-hee suddenly calls out to him to wait, leaving him completely startled. Turning back with a deeply flushed and sweating face, his heart begins to thump loudly as he asks what she wants. Standing before him, Yoo-hee stares at him in a silent, highly charged moment, her own heart pounding wildly with anticipation. Turning to face him directly, she hesitatingly asks if he has ever participated in any stretching exercise before. As a shocked Dae-ho stammers in complete disbelief, a deeply blushing Yoo-hee quietly confirms her question, leaving him entirely speechless as he admits that he indeed has. Looking away quietly for a brief moment, Yoo-hee suddenly stands up from the wooden porch with a determined look on her face. Standing tall in her white summer dress, she directly asks if he would like to engage in a stretching exercise session with her right now. Dae-ho is left completely frozen in shock, his face burning completely red as the warm evening sun begins to set over the traditional roof, leaving a highly charged silence hanging between them in the courtyard as they stare at one another. Under a peaceful sky with birds chirping over the traditional tiled roof, a deeply blushing Daeho nervously asks Yuhee what she is talking about. With her heart thumping, Yuhee quietly admits that he was correct before, hesitantly confessing that she has actually never participated in any study sessions in her life. She expresses her surprise that a young man like him already has so much prior experience with these study routines. Standing by the entrance of her traditional home, Yuhee softly reveals that if he is willing, she wants to try having a stretching exercise session with him. However, noticing his stunned silence, she quickly turns away and adds that if he is not in the right mood, he is perfectly free to head home. Terrified of losing this chance, a panicked Daeho quickly calls out her name and eagerly declares that he is absolutely ready to proceed, directly promising to guide her through their upcoming stretching exercise session. While Daeho waits, Yuhee prepares herself by heading to her peaceful, steamy traditional bathroom. Leaving her clothes in a nearby laundry basket, she slides into the warm wooden tub, soaking in the soothing hot water. As she gently scrubs her arm with a sponge, she finds herself lost in deep thought, wondering if she is truly doing the right thing. Unable to find an answer, she lets out a soft sigh and quietly pours more warm water over herself, letting the peaceful atmosphere of the steamy room calm her racing mind. Meanwhile, inside her bedroom, an incredibly nervous Daeho sits on the edge of the pink bed, his heart thumping wildly against his chest. As he waits in silence, his mind briefly wanders to memories of his previous lessons, making him feel even more flustered. Suddenly, the quiet room is broken by the sound of the door creaking open, prompting Daeho to spring up from the bed in utter surprise. Walking into the room, a freshly showered Yuhee wearing a pink thick t-shirt softly apologizes for keeping him waiting for so long. Daeho quickly reassures her that it is perfectly fine, and she quietly sits down on the chair right beside him, gently telling him that he may begin study session whenever he is ready. Gulping down his intense nervousness, Daeho slowly leans in to initiate their study session, but just as they are about to begin, Yuhee suddenly turns her head away and asks him to wait, leaving a completely bewildered Daeho frozen in utter surprise. Later, standing in the courtyard of the traditional house, a highly anxious Daeho asks Yuhee if there will be any issues or complications after their first joint stretching exercise. Putting on her shoes, Yuhee looks away shyly and reassures him that everything should be fine. Letting out a heavy sigh of relief, a blushing Daeho apologizes for his lack of experience during their mobility training, but a smiling Yuhee warmly replies that it is not his fault at all, jokingly attributing the intensity of the workout to her own tight hug. Deciding that it is time to leave, Daeho bids her farewell and turns to head home, but Yuhee suddenly calls out his name to halt him in his tracks. Blushing deeply, she gathers her courage and sincerely thanks him for his assistance today, before flashing a beautiful, warm smile and promising to see him again soon. Walking home down the quiet sunset-lit path, Daeho is filled with a sense of pure joy. Looking out at the beautiful orange sky, he cannot help but grin to himself as he proudly reflects on how well he managed to guide her through their initial stretching exercise session. Meanwhile, back at her house, Yuhee lies flat on her back on the wooden porch, raising her legs to stretch as she quietly reflects on the experience, concluding that her first stretching workout with him actually wasn't bad at all. Later that night, Mia is sitting comfortably on her bed, scrolling through her phone. Her quiet evening is suddenly interrupted by a soft knock on her door, prompting her to wonder if her mother has come to see her. Pushing the door open with a quiet click, Daeho hesitantly peeks in and asks if he can come inside, leaving Mia completely taken aback. He awkwardly steps into her room, scratching his head with a nervous chuckle as he explains that he has a rather question to ask her. Smiling knowingly to herself, Mia silently assumes that Daeho has returned because he couldn't resist her and wanted another study session, proudly resolving that she won't be easily pushed around. However, her thoughts are completely derailed when a blushing Daeho directly asks her for advice regarding the proper way to manage his protein macros and how to manage it properly. He explains his technical dilemma, wondering what a person is supposed to do if they are in the middle of a stretching exercise session. Gesturing with his hands, he admits that once he starts the study session, he struggles to stop and wonders if there is a safer alternative method they should be practicing instead. Hearing his highly specific questions, Mia's smug expression immediately vanishes, replaced by a wave of intense suspicion and irritation. Glaring at him with wide eyes, she directly demands to know if he is already engaged in a study session with someone else, leaving a panicked and sweating Daeho completely frozen in shock. Back inside Mia's bedroom at night, a tense silence fills the room as he demands to know what she is talking about. Leaning forward, she firmly instructs him to tell her the truth, realizing that something significant must have happened to him. Struggling to find his words, a nervous Daeho finally begins to explain, but Mia cuts straight to the point, directly asking him who he recently engaged in a study session with. Stunned by her bluntness, a deeply embarrassed Daeho averts his eyes and hesitantly admits that he cannot reveal her name. Mia is left completely stunned and speechless, struggling to process the reality that he actually had a study session with another girl. Pressing him once again, she demands to know if he truly completed a mobility session with someone else, and questions why he refuses to tell her identity. Looking down with a heavy heart, Daeho sincerely apologizes to her, firmly stating that he will never reveal the mystery girl's name. Letting out an exasperated sigh, Mia can only laugh at the absurd situation, realizing that he completed the study session while accidentally dropping his high-protein drink. Nodding in embarrassment, Daeho admits that she is correct and that he was never taught how to manage that part of the routine. Turning around on the bed in mild frustration, Mia chides him for his lack of caution, lecturing him that he must be far more careful and cannot simply drop his high-protein chocolate shake like that, or it'll be a waste. To demonstrate proper form, she flops face down onto her bed and explains that during a standard private study session where he lies on top of his partner, he must handle his training differently. However, as Daeho eagerly listens, Mia suddenly turns her head and notices his immediate reaction. Covering her face in deep embarrassment, she blushingly demands to know why his 20-kilo barbell has become so heavy, flusteredly reminding him that she was simply trying to give him a theoretical study session. Dismissing him quickly, Mia declares that her lesson is finished and tells him he can return to his own bedroom now. Still highly flustered, Daeho scratches his head and thanks her for her help before quietly stepping out into the hallway and closing the door behind him. Leaning against the door with a heavy sigh of relief, he walks back down the hallway, silently reflecting on how strict Mia is, thinking to himself that she behaves just like a real professional trainer. The next morning, a cheerful Une is busy in the kitchen preparing the morning meal, loudly calling out to the household that breakfast is ready. Hearing her mother's voice, Mia opens her bedroom door to head downstairs, but she quickly pauses when she spots Suah walking down the hallway. Surprised to see her sister up so early, Mia notes that she has not been skipping breakfast lately, to which a calm Suah replies that her lifestyle has been changing since her college semester ended. Watching Suah descend the stairs, a sudden, wild suspicion flashes in Mia's mind as her sister mutters that she isn't even that hungry. Terrified of her own thoughts, Mia begins to worry if Suah could possibly be the mystery girl Daeho had his private study session with, but she quickly shakes her head in utter disbelief, silently telling herself that she must be losing her mind to even consider such a crazy idea. Back at the breakfast table, the family gathers together as Une presents a steaming, freshly cooked dish. Setting it down, she playfully notes that she isn't sure if it tastes good, but encourages everyone to try at least a bite, while a cheerful Daeho happily comments on how delicious it looks. As her husband enjoys the meal, Une quietly celebrates to herself, glad that she took the time to watch that cooking show. Sitting next to him, Mia continues to stare at Daeho in complete silence, her mind spinning with a sudden, overwhelming suspicion. As she quietly eats her food, she tries to shake off her own wild theories, scolding herself for being hopeless and questioning if she has actually lost her mind. However, looking over at a completely happy and carefree Daeho devouring his breakfast, she cannot help but feel incredibly irritated, desperately wondering what kind of girl he could have possibly engaged in a relaxing stretch routine with. Later that morning, under a bright blue sky, Mia gets ready and announces to her mother that she is heading out to meet up with some friends. Stepping out of the front gate, her path is suddenly blocked by a young woman standing quietly on the street. Surprised by the stranger's presence, Mia directly asks who she is, prompting a flustered Yuhi to stammer nervously before asking if Daeho is currently at home. Confirming that he is indeed inside, Mia curiously asks what her visit is about and inquires if something has happened. Blushing deeply, Yuhi explains that she is his friend's sister and has simply come over to see him. Standing together on the quiet street, a sudden realization flashes in Mia's mind, and she inquires if she is actually Gobong's sister. With a polite chuckle, Yuhi warmly confirms her guess and introduces herself as Yuhi Han. Looking at her with wide eyes and a flushed face, Mia is struck with a sudden shock as everything instantly clicks into place, recognizing with absolute certainty that this must be the mystery girl Daeho had his study session with. Mia's loud voice suddenly echoes through the boarding house as she angrily demands for Daeho to come downstairs immediately. Hearing her call, a startled Daeho rushes down the steps and asks what is wrong, prompting a deeply flustered Mia to cross her arms and tell him that a lovely guest has arrived to see him. Confused by her vague explanation, Daeho asks who this guest could possibly be, but she simply glares at him and suggests he go find out for himself. Still highly bewildered, Daeho quietly makes his way toward the front door to investigate the surprise visitor. As Daeho heads outside, Une enters the hallway and curiously asks her daughter if someone came over to see the young man. Looking highly irritated, Mia briefly confirms it before turning around to head back upstairs, telling her mother not to worry about it in a dismissive tone. Left standing alone in the hallway, a visibly concerned Un-A sighs at her daughter's unusual behavior, wondering what could possibly be troubling her. Meanwhile, a curious Daeho quickly dashes out of the front gate and halts in surprise as he spots the visitor standing in the courtyard. Gasping in shock, Daeho realizes that the visitor is actually Yu-hee, who warmly returns his greeting and asks how he has been doing. Deeply blushing, Daeho asks what brings her to the house, prompting a shy Yu-hee to point down the road and suggest they go for a walk together. Daeho quickly agrees to the invitation, and the two begin walking side by side down the quiet street, with Yu-hee playfully asking if her sudden visit caught him off guard, which Daeho chucklingly confirms. Back at the house, a highly flustered and blushing Mia stands by the entrance, quietly peeking out the door to watch the two of them walk away. Crossing her arms in deep anxiety, she watches them disappear down the road, silently wondering what exactly is going on between Daeho and his new friend. Walking along a beautiful grassy path under the clear blue sky, Yu-hee casually asks Daeho if he currently doesn't own a mobile phone. Blushing slightly, Daeho confirms her suspicion, embarrassingly explaining that he has already broken his previous phones twice and is currently saving up to buy a new one. Hearing his explanation, Yu-hee reaches into her bag and pulls out a sleek white device, presenting it to him as a gift. She explains that it is simply her old phone that still works well, leaving a completely stunned Daeho to ask if this is truly for him. With a warm, bashful chuckle, Yu-hee hands it over, explaining that she wanted him to have it because she had no other way to contact him, leaving Daeho deeply touched by her thoughtful gesture. Deeply touched by her gesture, Daeho realizes that Yu-hee specifically wanted to have a way to call him. Looking incredibly flustered and embarrassed, Yu-hee quickly changes the subject, pointing down a nearby path and suggesting they head toward a special place she used to visit. Intrigued, Daeho follows her down a narrow dirt trail surrounded by tall grass, panting heavily as he tries to keep up with her energetic pace, playfully calling out for her to wait for him. Soon, they arrive in front of a massive, empty industrial complex. Yu-hee explains that the factory has been completely abandoned for a long time due to an ongoing legal dispute, a detail she originally learned from her father. Walking together into the cavernous, dimly lit interior, Daeho admits that he had absolutely no idea this place existed. Yu-hee quietly shares that she originally visited the site with Gobong when they were children, though her brother was far too terrified to ever return. Looking up at the impressive metal trusses of the ceiling, she notes how wonderful it is to see the structure in such a ruinous state. Turning to Daeho, Yu-hee curiously inquires if he feels frightened by the dark surroundings, but a sweating and blushing Daeho quickly reassures her that he isn't scared at all. Amused by his brave response, she playfully chuckles and compliments him on being exceptionally mature for his age. Daeho laughs sheepishly in response, but the playful atmosphere quickly shifts into a tense silence as Yu-hee looks up at him with intensely glowing eyes. Gathering her courage, she softly asks if he would like to teach her study session, reassuring him that she won't turn her head away if he decides to proceed. Left completely speechless by her bold invitation, a highly flustered Daeho gulps down his intense nervousness, his heart hammering wildly in his chest. Slowly gathering his composure, Daeho steps closer and gently places his hands on her study mouse, leaving the two of them to start a study session. On a bright afternoon, Mia is spending time with her friends at a local fast food restaurant, but her mind is clearly elsewhere. Sitting at the table, she constantly stares down at her glowing phone, anxiously wondering if Daeho has already returned home. She feels deeply distracted, silently convinced that he and Yu-hee have definitely gone off somewhere together, leaving her unable to focus on the gathering. Sensing her distraction, one of her friends suddenly leans in and directly asks her what she is doing, catching her completely off guard. Startled and blushing intensely, Mia quickly tries to laugh it off, nervously claiming that she is merely checking something on her phone. Her friend looks at her skeptically and gently complains about her behavior, pointing out that they have finally all gathered together after a long time and wondering what she could possibly be up to. Before Mia can respond, her friend playfully suggests that she must have a boyfriend now. Her face turns completely red, and she quickly dismisses the idea, taking a nervous sip of her drink while explaining that she has spent almost all of her time staying at home lately, meaning she has had absolutely no opportunity to meet anyone. Feeling overwhelmed by the questioning, Mia suddenly stands up, announcing that she needs to head to the bathroom, and quickly walks away. Left behind at the table, her friend watches her departure with a highly suspicious and knowing look, sensing that she is definitely hiding something. Meanwhile, as the evening sun begins to set, Daeho and Yu-hee are walking side by side down the street, enjoying a quiet stroll together. Yu-hee quietly peeks over at him with a warm blush, catching Daeho by surprise and leaving him slightly flustered. The two of them share a light giggle as they continue down the sidewalk, completely relaxed in each other's company. Their peaceful moment is suddenly interrupted by the loud screech of a bus pulling up to a nearby pedestrian crossing. As the vehicle comes to a halt, a passenger steps off the bus and onto the street. To their horror, the person who just arrived is none other than Go Bong. Go Bong freezes in place, his eyes widening in complete shock as he recognizes his close friend and his sister together. An incredibly tense silence falls over the street as Daeho and Yoo-hee turn around and find themselves staring directly at him. Looking entirely bewildered, Go Bong demands to know what the two of them are doing together. With their hearts pounding wildly in their chests, a heavily sweating Daeho and a completely mortified Yoo-hee can only stare back in utter panic, entirely unsure of how to explain themselves. Yoo-hee quickly tries to play it cool, laughing nervously as she greets her brother and explains that she simply ran into Daeho on her way back from downtown. Daeho eagerly jumps in to support her story, rubbing the back of his neck with an awkward laugh while claiming that he was actually on his way to Go Bong's house to meet up with him. After processing their explanations, Go Bong's suspicion completely melts away into a bright smile, happily concluding that the two of them must have just happened to cross paths. Seizing the moment, Yoo-hee suggests they all head home together, quietly whispering to Daeho to hurry up and join them. Daeho quickly agrees, eagerly dashing forward to catch up with the siblings. As they walk together through the grassy fields under a beautiful sunset sky, Go Bong casually mentions that Daeho does not currently own a mobile phone. Daeho explains that he actually broke his previous phone, prompting a thoughtful Yoo-hee to suggest giving Daeho one of her old working devices. Go Bong eagerly agrees that it is a wonderful idea, and they all share a happy laugh. Later that evening, the three friends gather in the backyard, happily eating watermelon, while Daeho enjoys flying his drone under the quiet twilight sky. Eventually, night falls over the neighborhood, and a heavily blushing and visibly exhausted Mia finally returns home. Stepping into the kitchen, she finds her mother stretching her tired muscles after a long day of chores. Mia hesitantly asks if Daeho has returned home yet, but her mother simply rubs her aching back with a tired sigh, confirming that he is still out. The news leaves Mia feeling incredibly disappointed and frustrated. Slowly making her way up the stairs, she mutters to herself about how annoying the younger generation can be, eventually stepping into her bedroom and closing the door behind her. Still deeply irritated, Mia slides off her jeans, left standing in her clothing item as she angrily reflects on the late hour. She flops face down onto her bed, letting out a long, restless sigh. Rolling onto her side, she continues to brood in the quiet room, highly frustrated as she wonders if Daeho is currently participating in an intense study session with his new friend. Clutching her pillow tightly in her hands, she fumes in silence, questioning how Daeho could possibly treat her this way. The next morning, the household gathers around the dining table for breakfast. While everyone else eats peacefully, a tense silence lingers as Mia sits directly across from Daeho, glaring at him intensely while they eat. Sighing to herself, she quietly fumes over his behavior, desperately wondering what exactly he was doing outside the night before. Unable to contain her frustration any longer, Mia suddenly taps her spoon down, stands up with her plate, and coldly announces that she has completely lost her appetite. After a curt thank you for the meal, she abruptly leaves the table, leaving a highly confused and slightly nervous Daeho to watch her go. Later that night, as the house goes quiet, Mia quietly makes her way down the hallway. Cautiously knocking on Daeho's bedroom door, she softly calls out his name. Hearing his response, she gently peeks inside the room, asking if he is still awake. Daeho confirms that he is indeed still up, and as Mia steps inside, she is completely shocked to find him sitting comfortably on his bed, happily typing away on a sleek mobile phone. Gasping in utter disbelief, Mia directly demands to know where on earth he managed to get such a device, leaving a highly startled Daeho to look up and innocently ask if she is talking about the phone in his hand.